Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for tuning into the always informative, always entertaining, The Boxing Authorities. Joining me at the desk, as always, Luther Dupree Jr., Smoking Jim Frazier, and my name is Claudio Relsano. We have a very, very special guest on today. He is the founder and contributor of Ringside Seat, a paper and digital magazine. He is also a boxing writer for ESPN, the UK Weekly, Boxing News, former editor of The Ring and KO magazine and World Boxing. He is also the author of a new book called Hooking Off the Jab. Our guest was also inducted into the International Boxing Hall of Fame in Canastota in 2015. And he's got even more of that. We've been here all day doing all his accolades. And that is again, Boxing Hall of Famer, Mr. Nigel Collins. Nigel, thank you so much for being on the show.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I love to talk about boxing.
Yes, you do, and you do a great job at it. But let's first start off. Tell us where you're originally from and how you got started in boxing.
Okay, I was born in England in a town called Bristol. That's where Long John Silver sailed from, and Treasure Island. Both my father and my grandfather were big boxing fans. So I caught the bug really early because of those two gentlemen. We didn't have a TV when we lived in England. The first TV we had was when I was about 13, and we were living in Pennsylvania. So then we watched boxing with my dad on TV, and it just went from there. I never thought that, I was going to have a career in boxing, but I became a freelancer for the Ring magazine and stayed that way for about a decade or more. I also had other clients. But the first fight I covered for the Ring was in November 1972, but it didn't appear in a magazine until like January of 73. And the pieces in the book, there's nothing back that far. It starts with 1980 and comes all the way up till today.
Now, again, you've been around, you mentioned it since 72. How has boxing changed for the good or for the not so good from when you started to now?
Well, let's look at the good first. They can, a boxer can make a lot of money these days if they're really at the top of the food chain. There's not much of a middle class, but there is a small one. And then there's a lot of guys that are really and women trying to scrape up a career. Sometimes they're successful, sometimes they're not. Back when I first started covering boxing, a lot of the shows depended on selling tickets. Not everything was on TV or streaming or anything like that back then. So they had to make good fights that people were willing to leave their home and go to the venue and buy a ticket instead of just turning on the TV. So it was different because the crowds were larger for fights that they are now. Of course, there are some exceptions now, but the worst thing about boxing right now, and has been for quite some time in the 70s, is the alphabet organizations. They really got a foothold in when Muhammad Ali decided he wanted a rematch with Leon Spinks, which actually he did, and it was a big moneymaker. But the alphabet organizations wanted him to fight Ken Norton. And they took the title away from him. And they had like Ernie Terrell and Eddie Machen fight for some phony title. But, now we have broadcasters on TV calling it the four-belt era. I've always maintained that there's only one world, so there can only be one world champion. So that's what's really bad now. And the sanctioning fees that fighters, it comes out of their purse.
Right.
Wow.
To fight for titles can be outrageous. So, it's the alphabets is sort of like a cancer on the sport. But we can't get rid of them, mainly because managers and promoters like them. Because, it doesn't cost them anything. It costs the fighter the money. And a lot of the fighters don't realize what it used to be back in the old days. You didn't have to nobody had to pay money to have a title fight. That was ridiculous. You want to make money with a title fight. So It's not what it used to be, but in some ways with streaming, you have a lot of fights available you probably wouldn't have saw otherwise. But that costs money too, you know. So another thing, back in those days, even contenders, back in the 70s, I'm talking, and prior to that, had day jobs. Uh, I don't think any of them have day jobs today. Certainly not the ones that are on TV. So it gave a different sort of air to the whole thing because you could go to the gym, watch the guys. They all went straight from work. In the morning, they got up early and they ran, went to their day jobs, and then went to the gym. And there's some of that, of course, for the guys that are just starting out. But you won't find a top 10 contender doing that, and you did in those days. I don't know whether that's good or bad, really, but they didn't go broke all the time because they were depending on boxing money.
Right.
And it's all going to end one day. And if you don't stash away a lot of money, you're going to be in trouble. But back then, hey, when your career was over, you still had a job and a way to make money, and there wasn't quite as much bad results for ex-boxers at that time because they still had money because they had a job.
Okay. Nigel Luther, I wanted to ask you about a fight this weekend, Chris Eubanks Jr. versus Liam Smith. What did you think going into the fight and after the results? Eubanks took a vicious shot. What were your thoughts about the fight?
I wasn't really thinking much about it, tell you the truth. I knew it was on. I kind of looked at it as a toss-up. And of course, the spectacular knockout was really something. And, Eubank said that, it was a once-in-a-lifetime shot. Well, I hope he's right and he doesn't get hit like that again. Yeah, I mean, that was a fight that you didn't really know for sure. I believe the odds makers had Eubank. But it was one of the fights that you didn't really know for sure what was going to happen because they were evenly matched. So that's a good thing. And the fighters in England, England is boxing crazy.
Yeah,
Sure.
Yes. Best fans in the world.
Yeah, the Mexicans, you got to put those in there. When I was editing the Ring magazine all these years, magazines are based on the percentage of your sales.
Okay.
And we would have much higher percentages in the UK and Ireland than we do in the United States. And, so that should just show you that even though England's a much smaller place and doesn't have as large a population, the percentage of people that buy the Ring was quite a bit higher than it is in the United States.
Okay, you kind of touched on a little bit, like to go a little bit deeper on the pay-per-view, cable, and networks. Now, when I was growing up, they would have a lot of fights on CBS, NBC, ABC, and then later on it shifted to ESPN and USA Today Tuesday Night Fights. Still terrific, and they had big-time fights on there. Now it seems like a relatively average fight is on pay-per-view for $70. Now, I'm good with Tyson Fury Wilder being on pay-per-view. I'm good with, those big Canelo versus Bivol being on pay-per-view. I'm good with that. I'm not crazy about, $100 or $85. I remember, again, in the 90s, it was $25 for a really good fight. Now they're getting a little bit on the other end. I think it's hurting boxing that your average fan can't get to know a fighter, follow his career like they used to tell stories, and you can follow the guy. What are your thoughts on that?
I agree with you 100%. Pay-per-view, as you probably remember, when it started out, it was the real big fights that everybody wanted to see. And prior to that, there was closed circuit in theaters and arenas. I saw a lot of Muhammad Ali fights at the Spectrum in Philadelphia, which was the big indoor arena then. And so the first nationally televised boxing match was Joe Louis's return bout with Billy Conn. Mm-hmm. And that was right at the end after World War II that they had a second fight. And that was the first one that was broadcast. And there were only 3 networks then. I forget which one it was. So, yeah, it was. It's you've got to search for fights now, especially because there's new newspapers. Well, I have a book, obviously, that I'm trying to sell. And I had another boxing book published in 1990. And then there were a lot of bookstores. There's not many of those now.
Yeah.
So everything's changed. Publishing has changed. The way to watch fights change. The one thing I will say about the streaming, just because this is my job, I do have DAZN and ESPN Plus. Now, ESPN Plus is a better deal because it's about half the same price.
Right.
If you got DAZN, you're going to see fights that you won't probably see anywhere else. But that's a lot of money for, it's a lot of money for me. It's a lot of money for the average fan as well. And pay-per-view, yeah, it's ridiculous. I mean, like they say, you have just average, normal fights on pay-per-view. And it has hurt boxing. You're so right. The one thing I do disagree with, that whenever you're selling something, there's like a desired market. And it's usually very young people.
Right.
And a lot of people think that young people don't go to boxing matches, but you go to a big fight in Vegas or LA or even in New York, a lot of young people are there. So I think the marketers have got that wrong. And that may hurt boxing a little bit because, people believe it, sponsors believe it, but there's a lot of young people there. That's ridiculous. And, well, who knows what's watching TV?
Right.
But I have colleagues, I have people I know that are fans. Some of them are old like me, and some of them are just like in their late teens. So, there's some misinterpretation of that. But you're right, it's way too expensive now. And usually, except for the Super Bowl, a big fight is the most expensive ticket in all sports.
Right. Right. And one question I have, I wanted to get your thoughts on Jake Paul from the Ohio area, real big on social media. Now he's come over to boxing. He's doing promoting. He's fighting. There's a whole YouTube boxing community out there now. What are your thoughts on Jake Paul, and do you think it's a good thing for the sport or not?
Well, I don't watch those fights.
Okay.
Number one, because I don't have to cover them.
Okay.
Two, because I'm really not interested. But I'm not going to knock him.
Well, he has a belt. Didn't somebody just give him a belt? The WBA, I believe, just gave him a belt.
I think they took it off their pants and gave it to him. I think that if he wants to go out there and fight guys that aren't really boxers and make a lot of money, more power to him. Mm-hmm. But it's not really what I'm interested in. It's the same with MMA. A lot of boxing fans, they hate MMA, they knock it. I don't knock it. I just don't watch it.
Right.
So, it's not a problem for me, but I think there's obviously an audience for it. Mm-hmm. Remember when they had the fight between Mike Tyson and Roy Jones a year or so ago?
Yeah, one of the biggest pay-per-views.
Snoop Dogg was great. They should have had Snoop Dogg commentating on all the fights.
Oh, my goodness. That was one of the wildest.
That's the one thing I liked about that show. He was hilarious.
Oh, man, that was a whole different show. And Triller, I thought they had something at first, but
they just died out.
They kind of died out with some of the problems.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that know that big money can be made in boxing,
right,
and they get into it and they don't know what the hell they're doing. Like a guy like Bob Arum, he's still going strong, putting on really good shows.
At 90, yeah. And I see Don King had a promotion this weekend.
Don King had a show last weekend, but he hasn't really been a big time promoter in a long time. But Bob Arum, I think he's probably the smartest man in boxing because years ago he realized that the Latino market was saving boxing, and he started to put together shows that were particularly aimed at that market. Because he was the person that actually knew what was going on, not what was just going on now, but what it was going to be in the future.
Right.
Because it's true. Mexican and Mexican Americans, Puerto Ricans, Throughout the Caribbean, there's boxing. Jamaica's had some great boxers over the years. So, it's actually an international sport. Japan is big on boxing. When the Klitschko brothers were going, Germany was selling out soccer stadiums.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
They do that in England now with Fury and Joshua and things like that. So it all depends on where you live. But as far as the sort of phony fights,
Phony fights.
I'm not sure whether guys are falling down on purpose or what have you.
Wow. A couple
I
of them did
think
look
really-
suspect. You're right.
Paul is smart enough, I think, to realize he's not going to ever get in there with a real good fighter.
Right.
So
He could get
he's
hurt.
been professional and has a decent record. I don't think. I think he's making so much money fighting these nobodies.
That's right.
I wouldn't change a thing.
Oh,
Exactly.
what the heck, He's,
with you.
and his brother is involved in that stuff too, I believe.
Right. A whole family business. Brothers,
Yeah,
the
so,
mom,
more
everything. So they
power
did
to
it
them.
nice.
But, it's, you won't find the hardcore boxing fans. That's where the demographic is all young people.
Right.
Not all, that's an
Yeah,
overstatement.
his crowd. We were talking to one in particular. They said it's a whole different crowd when you cover a Jake Paul event than a traditional boxing.
Right.
One thing I want to know. We always have this debate. Women's boxing. I'm a big fan, especially now. I think it's better than ever. Smoking Jim on our panel says he does not. I wanted you to weigh on women's boxing right now. Do you think it's the best it's ever been?
Oh, definitely. In the most recent issue of Ringside Seat, I was assigned to write a feature story on the rise of women boxing.
Okay.
Obviously, what was interesting, they had the sellout show at the Garden. The first time women topped a card.
Yes.
About a month or so later, they sold out the O2 Arena in London for an all-female card.
Yes.
So, and listen, a lot of the male boxers talk about, the best should fight the best. That doesn't happen very often. But the women have got the guts to do that.
Yes, they do. Thank
Doing
you.
what the male boxers should do.
Exactly. Why is that? Why aren't the male the best fighting the best? Bud Crawford left negotiations against Spence. We don't know about Tank Davis and Ryan Garcia or Devin Haney. Why is it just the networks or all these promoters? Why aren't we getting the big fights in men's boxing?
It's very, very rare that a boxer doesn't want to fight somebody.
Right.
It's usually his management, his promotion. Not always, of course. Nothing's always. But they are the people, the negotiators. I think that there's two very good fighters in Philadelphia now. One is Boots Ennis.
Ooh, yes.
And then there's Scooter Fulton.
Oh, yeah. Cool boy. Yes.
Yeah, right. Both of those guys are very, very, very good. Nobody knows who they are in Philadelphia, unless you're a boxing fan. But, they've got a lot of money behind them. But the problem is, in 2022, Boots only fought once.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't understand that. I don't know.
Fulton only fought twice. Now, part of that is they're getting big money.
Okay.
But it's not good for your career because people forget about you.
That's right.
Right.
Unless you're already a star. Now, those guys have star potential. Unfortunately, I covered the fight in D.C. 2 weekends ago.
Tank Davis okay.
Yeah, and Boots had the semifinal, and the guy just ran all night, and he won every round on every judge's card, but, it wasn't the sign of sensational, victories that we're used to from him, but
Right.
I don't think he's ever fought a sprinter like that.
Yeah, that's what I said. I thought Usain Bolt retired. He came back and taking the
it's
former
like,
Karen.
that's usually the Europeans have that stand-up style,
Mm-hmm.
They don't fight with bob and weave or out of a crouch too much. But, they're good movers, or that guy was. He was a good fighter.
He was. Different
If
style.
either of you guys watch it on TV, right in the last round, towards the bell, they actually stood toe-to-toe and traded punches for a few seconds, which was the only time in the
The
fight.
only
there was
time, right.
But the guy who had ran every round was doing better. in that brief exchange. Of course, he doesn't punch hard enough to hurt Ennis, but that's, you wonder how would it have been if this guy actually tried to win?
Exactly.
He probably got knocked out, but that's probably what his whole plan was.
Speaking about that, Rashidi Ellis was another guy that people were, and he lost that fight. How did you see that fight? Did you have him losing? I know he got knocked down at the end
Yeah, it was a close fight, but the knockdown at the end swayed me to give it to the other guy, who was a good fighter. It was a close fight. So, he lost his first fight.
Right. So playing matchmaker, I wonder if they would have put Rashidi Ellis in against Karen, because they're both movers.
That'd be a wonderful
and
fight.
Boots Enos against the guy that Rashidi Ellis
I don't
fought.
think I want to cover that one.
That would have been a track meet with Ellis and Karen running around the ring. But I think
exactly.
Boots and the guy that Ellis fought would have been a banger.
a good fight,
That would have been a great fight.
You mentioned Ennis and Fulton, and nobody in Philadelphia outside of huge boxing fans know about them. Something we talk about on this show all the time. I'm 58. I grew up whenever as a matter of fact, it's still on YouTube, where they had Muhammad Ali and Ken Norton on the Johnny Carson show.
Yeah.
But if there was a big fight coming up, they would be on those shows, right? And nowadays, with all the social media and everything out there, I don't see them promoting the individuals as much as they should. And also, Buster Douglas in February of '90. I'm a huge boxing fan. I knew who Buster was, okay? But they told the story about his mother, and that really just touched me. It resonated because my mom had recently passed, and I said, that's it. Buster's my guy, and I love him to death, right? So they don't tell stories. We know about Mike Tyson's story, Donnie Lalonde's story, Boom Boom Mancini's story about wanting to win for his dad, and so on and so forth. And Sugar Ray Leonard coming out of the Olympics, and everybody knew who he was, hitting the ground running. Nowadays, there's a lot of stories out there. What do we know about Canelo? I don't think too much.
I've been following Canelo since Oscar signed him. In fact, a funny story. I was in LA doing a week-long piece about Oscar de la Hoya. And one night we had to fly down to Tucson for a show he was promoting in a casino just outside of Tucson. And I interviewed him on the way down in the plane. And he said that, I've just discovered a fighter that I want to sign. He's got red hair, but I can't remember his name. So he did. He signed him. And when Richard Schaefer basically stabbed Oscar in the back, there were a few guys that hung around. And Canelo was the big fighter that kept Golden Boy, going.
Right. He was already ahead at first. Yeah. When everybody left.
Bernard Hopkins stayed because he's like a PR guy. He does some TV, but what he's really good at is talking. So he's always available for interviews and does a good job of running a press conference. You couldn't have a better PR guy than Bernard because he's a Hall of Famer, a great fighter, and he likes to talk.
Right. Now, you mentioned De La Hoya, his big fighter now, Ryan Garcia. Do you think him and Tank Davis fight in April? Do you know if the contract was signed? There's a lot of back and forth. What are your insights?
The rule was no fight is for sure until the guys get in the ring.
Right. Especially with Ryan Garcia. We've seen him pull out of a number of fights.
Years ago on TV, I forget which network Howard Cosell was on, but it was an afternoon fight. It was supposed to be a rematch between Mike Rossman and Galindez, the guy he won the title from. Yeah. And Galindez wouldn't come out of the dressing room.
Yeah. Right.
And Cosell was practically, having a meltdown. But, it's when they get in the ring. That's the only time you know for sure there's going to be a fight.
Now, how do you see that fight going if they do get in the ring, if Ryan finds his pen and signs the contract? Do you think Ryan Garcia can beat Tank Davis, or how do you see that fight going?
Well, the thing is, we know that Tank Davis and Ryan Garcia are big punchers from what we've seen so far. So I think if they really get together, the guy who wins will be the guy who has the better chin, because they can both bang, and a lot of their fights have been one punch knockouts and things like that. So these guys can bang. As far as boxing goes, it's hard to say because a lot of their fights are over so quickly. But yeah, I think that matchup would be a good fight, something a lot of people will want to see, and I think the strongest chin will prevail.
Okay.
Now, we're not picking on him, our colleague here, Smoking Jim Frazier. We love him to death now. But he says that today's heavyweights, this is the greatest era of the heavyweights, which I disagree. Luther and I believe it's the 70s, then probably the 90s. I mean, we're not going back to the 50s and 40s, but I'm talking about that 70s to present. Number one, do you think that today's heavyweights are the greatest of all time? Number two, what era do you think is the greatest heavyweight era?
Well, I'll go first. Yeah, I think the 70s, with all those very famous names, was probably the best era. But I tell you, Tyson Fury, he's a nut job, but he is a great fighter. Now, he talks a lot of weird stuff, but when he says what he's going to do in a fight, he does it. It's very bizarre. He, for a huge man, is a tremendous boxer. I'm sure you've all seen him on the ropes, ducking all those punches and laughing. And obviously, he's very brave. He gets off the floor to win, and quite a few of his fights. And he combines a huge guy. He looks like he's got a beer belly sometimes when he gets in there. And he's dancing not dancing, but he's moving all around very quickly. And his hand speed and his reach. I think that Tyson Fury could have fought well and been very successful back in the 70s. But it's just one guy. I think there was just so many good fighters back then. Exactly. Look at all the guys that Ali fought. They're all on his record, most of them. So it's not the same anymore. I wish it was, but I've learned that you gotta, just like the fighters, the fans gotta roll with the punches. And it was funny. There was a tweet this morning when I woke up. I found it from a guy who bought my book. And he'd photographed a paragraph that he said that he thought it was very funny. And what it was, I was explaining that people that aren't hardcore boxing fans don't realize that boxing fans will sit through dozens and dozens of horrible fights or mediocre fights just because they're going to see a good one or a great one every now and then. And you never know what it's going to be, so you got to wait. But that's like a fix. If you see a really great fight, it's a fix. It'll hold you over, for months before the next one comes along. But casual fans aren't going to do that. It's just the hardcore.
Yeah. That's definitely true. I mean, everybody always remembers that great fight. We can go back to 70s, 80s, 90s, and in the 2000s. But the heavyweight division today, you mentioned Tyson Fury. I think it's, we have some interesting fighters, but they're not fighting each other. I mean, we just had Efe Ajagba and Shaw. I wasn't really impressed with that. We had Johnny Rice with another upset. I just think there's talent here, but I wouldn't put it anywhere near the 70s or 90s. We know Tyson Fury is good. We know Usyk is good, Wilder. But outside of that, we don't really know. What are your thoughts?
Ruiz.
Let's ask our guest what he thinks about this current state.
Well, there are a lot of good fighters as well below the heavyweight limit. That do pretty well.
Right.
So it's not just the heavyweights. In fact, it's only the heavyweight fights are really not good very often, just like other fights. But there's sort of a focus on the heavyweights. I think it was somebody said that being the heavyweight champion of the world is like being the big toe of God. It's something. It's very special, but that specialness is going away because of so many belts. Yes. People are confused. Which I forget who it was. There was a boxer came up to me and was talking, and he said something. It might have been Bernard Hopkins that, you know, the person he was talking to didn't even really know who he was. He just recognized his face, and strange stuff goes on like that. But I have been in it so long and seen so many ups and downs that there's that old joke. They've buried boxing so many times they've run out of shovels. And that was very true back in the 60s when Emil Griffith had his fight with Benny Kid Paret and Paret Don. That almost killed boxing. There was nothing on TV for a long time after that. And then you were right, you mentioned the 1976 Olympics when we had all those great fighters.
Sure.
And then, Nate, speaking of the Olympics, did you hear rumors again that boxing's not going to be part of the next?
Yeah, we talked about that on a previous show, and I can't believe that. I know the Olympics isn't what it used to be because we were all tuned in and saw the great prospects, and we knew who they were, as I said, when they hit the ground running, when they went to the pros. Why is that? Why would they? I mean, I know, again, it's not what it was, but why would they take away probably the best sport in the Olympics?
And that's like that legend. That's when you think
It's
of
a
Olympics,
must.
you think of
Boxing,
the
that's
gold
right.
medals, the boxing.
That's right.
Nobody cares.
Boxing in the Olympics has changed. It's now like fencing with gloves on.
Wow.
Yeah,
Back in the days when we're watching those guys, the great fighters that came out of the Olympics in the 70s and 80s, they were real fighters. And you could tell from the Olympics, if you watch the last Olympics, most of the fights are, like I said, fencing with gloves on, because you touch the guy, that's the point. The opponent, the power behind the punch doesn't mean anything in the Olympics. But if you go back, the Spinks brothers, when they were both won gold medals, they were a slugfest, and they didn't wear headgear back then.
Right.
And that seemed like a small thing, but you could see the fighter's face.
Yeah.
Right.
And you would identify with him. Because you know what he looked like. That's a very simple thing. But the guys that in the Olympics, they haven't been exposed that much because people tend to watch professionals. But when they turned pro, you already knew they could fight well. Because you could see, if you watch the Olympics, they look like 3-round pro fights. Now it's 3 rounds of nothing. And another thing, the Olympics, they're corrupt. That's the truth. And we got enough corruption in boxing already.
Right.
Not to add another layer. The politics in amateur boxing is almost as fierce, maybe fiercer than it is in the pros.
Wow.
It's, a lot of time the best guy doesn't go to the Olympics, or the best girl. Let me just say this about the Olympics. The one they held in London, that's what really helped the female fighters. It was the first time that women fought in boxing in the Olympics. And they got a lot. Well, Joshua's not a woman, obviously, but he was in those Olympics. And he became the guy that could fill soccer stadiums. So that was very good. And that is one of the main reasons that women boxing has now reached higher than I ever thought it would. Because, a lot of countries send women boxers to the Olympics. It's not exclusively here. A lot of the ones we see on TV are English. Katie Taylor's Irish. So it's the Olympics do help, but they don't help as much as they used to, because you really don't. You don't see good fights.
True. I wanted to get your thoughts. Smoking Jim here is really high on Richard Torres. He has him in his top 10 pound for pound already. He thinks he's that good. Just wanted to get your thoughts on Richard Torres and also Keyshawn Davis, 2 guys that came through the Olympics. Just wanted to get your thoughts on those guys.
I'm not familiar with Davis.
Okay.
Who was his first name?
Keyshawn Davis, a welterweight. He fights on ESPN.
He's not much.
Yeah, he's just starting his career off, Jim. He's like 7-0.
Yeah, I may have seen him. I don't know. There's a lot of up-and-comers that go on Showtime, Showbox's show.
Right.
I don't always remember who they are until maybe they come on a second time.
Okay.
Um, that guy Brandon Lee.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
Brandon Lee, right.
Yeah, I saw him. He's a good puncher. I
Right.
don't know if he can box, but he's a good puncher.
And what? Oh, you talking about Torres?
What about Richard Torres, the
I
big
don't know who
heavyweight?
Richard Torres is.
Oh,
You're
okay.
trying-
Wow. See,
Have you ever heard-
see, that's a
Jim,
shame.
see-
That's what I'm trying to say. You are a boxing expert.
Maybe,
Right.
I watch fights that I know I'm going to write about.
Right.
Okay. But I mean, we should. I
I
bet you.
I make money that way.
No,
That's
no
my-
doubt. But and we're going to talk about your book and your ringside seat, but real quick. But that's just it. When Sugar Ray was coming out for his
You knew
first
him.
fight, you knew who he was.
Right.
You see what I'm saying? And that's a difference now. And nobody's promoting those stories and guys. And I think the lack of person. I say that I work in pro baseball. I say that hurts baseball. Nobody knows who these guys. There's no personalities. You're not allowed to be colorful. Whereas back then, the Sugar Rays or the Spinks brothers, and we can go on and on. But real quick, before we talk about your publications and your Hall of Fame induction, who is your favorite boxer that you ever dealt with?
Well, he's not the best fighter,
Right.
but my favorite boxer was Benny Briscoe, the Philadelphia Met.
Sure.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
A big star in the 70s.
Yes.
And traveled all over the world. He was one of the few boxers could win on the road.
Okay.
I knew him, I live at that time. I lived in Center City, Philadelphia. Now I live about 35, 40 miles outside. But I used to hang around the gyms all the time because that's the best way to get to know boxers.
Right. Right.
Now, your two publications. Let's first talk about your book.
Okay, I got it here. Can I hold it up?
Please. Yes.
There you go.
Oh,
Right.
right.
Off the jab.
Off the jab.
Explain. Paint a picture for us of the book.
Well, it's as I say. The first story in there was written in 1980. And the book is divided up into different sections. It starts with 3 essays about Muhammad Ali that I wrote for ESPN after he died. They sent me there to Louisville to cover it. And I just don't focus on his death because it's 3 pieces.
Right.
Some personal experiences is one story, and the lead one was he really the greatest of all time?
Okay.
So, and the end of the book is 4 pieces about Mike Tyson. One of them is the infamous jailhouse interview I did with him when he was incarcerated in Indiana. So those are the bookends, and in between there's darn near everything. A lot of today's stars are in there. Crawford, got a piece on him. So a lot of the fighters to today, and then we have a section on the old timers. There's a section called Behind the Scenes, where I reveal the fact that many people didn't know that I once managed boxers. And I wrote a piece about it that's in the book, and it's called 10% Off the Top, The Misadventures of a Frontman. And I decided to take the plunge and try to manage some fighters. But it wasn't for me. I realized that after a while that I wasn't really suited to that kind of role. But what I say in there, nobody can fly above the fray when you're involved in the business end of boxing, a manager, a promoter. But the best part about slipping into the dark side are the stories. And if you ever get a chance to read it, it's sort of Runyon-esque kind of style I wrote it in.
Okay.
But it was a real adventure. I don't regret doing it, but I made a little bit of money, but not too much. So that's a story I really like in there. Then there's a sad story. There was a fighter called Sonny Banks. He was the first guy to knock down then Cassius Clay.
Wow.
On TV, who eventually died as a result of the injuries he suffered in a fight in Philadelphia.
Wow.
And so it's not all upbeat.
Right.
This box is not all upbeat. Let me just have a look here, see what else I got.
Now, who's on the cover? Who's on the cover?
Yeah.
We were trying to see who's on the cover of the.
There's Yeah, Walk on the Dark Side. There's one about extraordinary characters. Boxing's got a lot of characters.
Oh, yeah.
So it's pretty much. I have a story about how boxing came to Mexico. I wrote a piece about the Cubans that were very dominant in the Olympics,
Right.
and old men. There's nothing in there that that I'm unhappy with, because I had almost 50 years of material to pick it from. And that was probably the toughest part of an anthology, when you have such a body of work, narrowing it down.
Right. That means you got to come up with a part two.
Right.
Well, we'll have to see how this one sells. That's the way it goes. I've got more than enough material for it.
Oh, you'll have it. We have a few more minutes to go.
I don't know. I've had some book signings in New York, Atlantic City, Philadelphia. But I know what I sold at those shows. But the only publishers can go in Amazon and get the sales.
Okay. Now, a couple more things real quick.
People don't know that, but only the publishers can see the sales results.
Right.
Okay.
A couple more things before we go. Luther wanted to know who was on the cover of the book, and also you have, because I definitely want to get to your Hall of Fame. How can people get ringside seat? And you just said how they can get your book now.
Yeah, the book if I'm going to have more signings, if you're not in anywhere near me to come to a signing, you just go to Amazon. It's not a really expensive book. It's a paperback. On the cover, it's Norris and Curry.
Okay, I thought that was Norris. Yeah, I saw the box haircut.
It's funny. There's nothing in there about them.
Either one of them.
And when people ask me, I always say, you can't judge a book by its cover.
Right, there you go.
But why those two?
That was selected by the publisher and the designer.
Oh, okay.
And,
Now tell us about your Hall of Fame induction. That had to be an unbelievable feeling.
It was. It was. I actually helped the Brophies get going, because I was editor of The Ring at that time. The only real Hall of Fame was the one that Nat Fleischer started, but it was more or less a paper Hall of Fame. There was no building. He would just work out of the office and have plaques for the fighters, and they were in the magazine and all that stuff. It's sort of surreal, because it's a long weekend. It's not just 2 days. And somebody who was inducted that I know before me said, "Oh, Nigel, you're going to feel just like you're a movie star for the weekend." And that's pretty much what it's like. When I took my grandson and my daughter, and when we pulled into the hotel parking lot, there were people lined up.
Yeah.
To get autographs. So it's really strange in that way. And they're you're going from one event to another. They have a banquet. The thing that I liked the most was the parade.
Yeah.
Because I got my grandson to ride with me.
That's
Wow,
nice.
Yeah.
You know how you sit on the back of a convertible kind of thing?
Sure.
He just couldn't believe what was happening.
Yeah.
And the thing is, the crowds that come to see the parade have grown an awful lot.
Okay.
There were always quite a few people, but now it's huge. So, he caught the ride in the parade at a good time when there was I don't know. I didn't count the parade audience, but it was thousands. Let's put it that way.
Well, you know what? We're going to come out there. When Vinny Paz gets inducted, we're going to come out there for sure. Hopefully he gets inducted soon. But Nigel,
Vinny Paz is a really nice guy. I guess you guys know.
Yes,
Yes.
yeah, we love Vinny.
He's a sweetheart.
Yes.
I'll tell you one thing about him.
Yes.
All through my career, he's only one of 2 boxers that wrote me a thank you letter.
Wow.
It's not that you expect it, because you can write a very positive story about a boxer with 1 negative sentence, and that's all they're worried about.
That's all I remember.
Sure.
It's crazy, you're praising them for most of it, or talking about their fights and all. And if there's one line in there that they don't like, that's what they pick on. But it's kind of crazy. The Hall of Fame was wonderful. You know, when the actual induction and they give you your ring and all
Sure,
of that,
sure.
that's obviously a very magical moment. And it was funny. Jim Lampley was being inducted the same year, 2015. And I knew him fairly well from the fights. And there's a 5K race on Saturday.
Right.
And I was the only person who was going to be inducted who ran in it. Lampley came in at the last minute, and I said to him, you know, I wish you'd have got here a day earlier. I was going to challenge you to a 5K race. and he just laughed at me. But my time was pretty good because the course doesn't have many hills.
Right, right.
What killed you?
You know what, Nigel? This was a quick 45 minutes, and we definitely, with your permission, we want you back on again. We want you to be a regular. We want you to be a friend. You're already a friend of the show. We want you back on again because I know you have a lot more stories, and we want to get everything out of you that we can. But thank you so much for being on the show, and again, we appreciate you. Thank you.
Well,
Yes, great
thank
job.
you for inviting me and helping me plug my book and listening to my boring stories.
No.
No, exciting. Oh,
Whenever you want me, you know where to find me.
yes.
All right, we'll get you for sure. Thank
All right,
you.
Thank you.
Is
All
there a
right.
link you can send me for this?
We will
Yes,
have-
yes,
send
we'll
you
get
links
that to
the
you.
shows. All right.
Yes, sir.
All right. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thank
All right,
you.
thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Okay, everyone. Thank you so much, Nigel Collins, Hall of Famer. And as I always say, we hope you enjoyed our show as much as we enjoy bringing it to you. Thank you for tuning in to the Boxing Authorities.